think we'll give it a minute. Looks like who we have here. I know Steve Cadwallader said he's not going to make it this weekend. I know Steve Zaretti is actually on a plane right now, so he won't be here either.
Yeah. Thank you. And again, Steve mentioned at the last meeting, he won't be here today. So
Yep,
I'm here to take notes and to cover for him. Thank you.
sounds good. Well, thank you. I think oh, Abigail just sent us a little note saying should be all set now. Thanks, Abigail. Maybe we'll give it one more minute. I think actually I was going to ask Laura. Looks like she stepped out. I want to see if Alicia was planning to join or if Duncan. Do you know if John Petrillo was planning on joining? I know that Alicia and John both are regulars.
Alicia was definitely planning on joining. She might have been having the same kind of problems I was having. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
I think John was planning on being here. I'll text him now and see what's up.
Yeah, might just want to let them know that we are live now. So, with that, I think I'll jump right into it really quickly so that we don't lose much more time. Um, the first thing on the agenda, remarks by the chair. I don't really have any remarks other than to say I know that several of the subcommittees have been working all week on trying to get some of the materials together. I know that the industry subcommittee has put together a draft. I don't think it's necessarily ready for action yet, but a pretty decent start on the various pieces that they're charged with, which I think we'll probably have a little bit more of a detailed status update later on in the meeting. But I wanted to mention that, and I know I've been in touch with Laura earlier this week and Eric to see if the environmental committee was working on that too. So we'll get to those later, but those are in the works. And obviously the policy subcommittee, which I think most of us are members of anyway at this point. We obviously have three different policy considerations that we're trying to comment on, which will be the focus of the majority, I think, of today's meeting.
Yeah, our draft is a good 90%. We just
Okay.
need to review it a little more.
Sounds good. So I don't see anybody from the public, so I think I'm just going to move that we skip public comment here and just jump right into policy considerations if that works for everyone. And I will share my screen, just starting off with the tariff proposal. Mariana, I hope it's okay. I have the SharePoint open. I hope that's not a violation of any. Okay, very good. So I'm going to just share my screen. Give me a second here.
You were going to say violation of what?
Of any policies from the Green Bank. So I think this is correct.
I hope you're right. It seems fine. This is for external, was set up for external review, so should be fine.
Okay. Let me know if you can see my screen. I think you probably can at this point.
Yep,
yes.
We can see it.
All right, perfect. So we basically put together I should say Mariana put together the SharePoint so that we could try to work on this collaboratively as opposed to trying to trade emails and whatnot. Seems to be working pretty well. And I thought it made sense for us to try to go through some of these different comments and changes that have been made based off of the document we were working off of last week. So it's all track changes. We could see some of the differences here. I know several of us have already logged in and taken a look at it, but first things first, is there anything anybody wanted to bring up from a larger perspective on the tariff proposal?
Can I sort of taking a step back, Len? Does everybody have access to that? Laura, you should have access, and just want to make sure that you're on mute.
I'm dealing with a few technical things, guys, right now. Alicia wasn't able to get in. She's trying to get in. The link wasn't working. Okay. So that's the first thing I'm trying to deal with. So I think she will be in now. Second of all, what? Access to what? Sorry, because I was dealing with that.
No worries. Access to this SharePoint that was set up for the sort of
okay, let's see.
subcommittee members so that we could.
You sent it? Is it something you sent?
You should have received it directly from SharePoint, but I also sent a link to that
Okay,
in one of our emails, and I can
okay.
send
Yeah.
something to you.
I
now.
will
You can see.
apologize. I have been out of the office on talks most of the week. Plus, I think I got a concussion on Monday, so I'm trying to figure out when to see a doctor and fitting one in right after this. So
Right.
let's see. Okay. So,
And
yeah,
Laura, maybe what we can do is if you're having trouble offline, feel free to reach out with me and I don't know what I did with Lens, but we got it to work. So hopefully we can do the same with yours.
okay, I'm searching for emails from you to see if I can find that link so that I can check to see if I have it. Okay, where is it? Okay.
Is it okay if while you search, because I
Yes,
know we don't have a lot of time, we sort of
yep, sure.
work on the document?
Yeah. I'm just, what will the link say? Policy considerations?
I think so, yes.
I think
that's
so,
what-
yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, let's make sure I can get in. Accepts. And we will see if I can get in. Yes,
So-
I can get in. Thank you.
Perfect. So the one we're looking at right now, Laura, just if you want to follow along, the last resort service tariff,
Thank you.
and we're right at the beginning here. There were a few changes made with regard to eligibility. We leveraged the document that John Petrillo had originally put together for us with the proposal, and it was pretty comprehensive, I thought, in terms of trying to capture a pretty detailed snapshot of what Rhode Island does and adopt it into Connecticut's purposes. We did make a few recommended changes here. I know Mariana, if you had initially put in, the question about would this be for any class one renewable? I actually took an approach to try to address that so that this would be specifically tailored towards existing hydropower as opposed to anything else, because obviously there are a lot of other programs that are designed for other technologies and whatnot. And that's the first big change I think that was made with regard to John's proposal. And I wanted to open that piece up for discussion right off the bat, just see how the wording and whatnot plays with everyone, and if they think this would actually capture what we're trying to capture.
So just
Go
ahead, Mariana. I was just going to ask for clarity's sake that so if class one isn't the filter to use, this is then open to hydro that is meeting environmental considerations, but not with any of the limiting factors like the year or anything like that. Is that what we're now saying?
That was the gist of my approach here. Only because if we make it contingent upon being Connecticut class one eligible, number one, we'd have to change the class one definition to include some of these resources. So it almost would require two different law changes as opposed to one. And frankly, it may be a larger lift for the legislature to actually change anything in the RPS specifically. This was literally trying to approach it from, a limited scope of just basically smaller existing run-of-river resources that would comply with some of the guardrails that Laura had included in her document she sent earlier in this process, which I included a little later in here, or I tried to capture them anyway, at least in some of the language that we can get to in a moment. But I see, Duncan, you have your hand up.
Right. Good. So if we do take out the Connecticut RPS filter, then we'll see down below that Len has added what we call the guardrail language that's in the RPS now. So it becomes something where we're not doing it here, but we're doing it there. If we get rid of the RPS filter, maybe that's a good idea, because then it means that the developer, the project doesn't have to go and get that and then come to this. You can kind of do them in parallel. It also means that if something slips and we don't get the Connecticut Class 1 for these existing small projects, it doesn't trip them up. So that's the idea, and we can go down below and look at Len's wording on that. So it says eligibility existing, run of river, hydropower. That's fine. Do we want to limit it to existing? Can we include decommissioned, and can we include new projects? And then do we want to throw in the word instantaneous for run of river? So let's look at those things.
I would say, my perspective on the decommissioned, I'm a little torn on adding anything decommissioned specific. I think the new resources have their own programs that they would be qualified for if somehow or other they were actually built, which I don't think they would necessarily need to qualify for a special tariff if it's a new facility. That's just my own personal view on this. I see John has his hand up, and then Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Len. I guess two observations. I am not opposed to this idea of including some specific guardrail language. I do wonder if it's not an elimination of the RPS criteria, but an or. In that case, say projects are already, somehow qualifying for RPS. Like a new, like taking Colebrook as an example. I don't know if that project just qualifying kind of as a new resource would be enough to justify kind of repowering. And the other question I have is the way the guidelines or the way that the language is in here now relative to kind of the guardrails. How does that address participation by out-of-state resources? And I know this is a little bit sticky with the Commerce Clause discussion we've been having, but just wanted to ask that question and see how we might want to consider that.
I think we tried to address that very specifically down below here. Is interconnected with an electric distribution company. I don't know if what we have specifically in this language would suffice, but I think that would be an approach we can take, or it seems like we've been trying to take in this recommendation, or excuse me, consideration.
So would these be the IOUs, or would say like a municipal utility like Norwich be subject to any of these provisions?
I would propose that it should include all of the Connecticut utilities, including municipals. But that's my opinion on this.
I like this idea, Len, to tie it back to kind of the interconnection attributes to keep it local. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Eric, I know you have your hand up next.
Yeah, well, I actually, John, I think asked my question, which was just to clarify whether the intent was to, focus this benefit on Connecticut, and if that's the case, I think we've talked about those aspects. So I'll just step back.
Go ahead, Mariana.
Sorry, I like, John, your idea of the or that it qualifies already as a class 1, or sort of the eligibility requirements that we're listing here. I guess my only question is if it does qualify as a class 1 and it's not a Connecticut asset, would it be able to benefit from this? And therefore, while in principle I agree with you, are we better off just removing the whole class 1 reference so that eligibility is based on these items, and there's language in there that there should be alignment with in-state resources.
That's a great point. I think by the time you added in language to have that be constrained to some extent, it would get just really messy and hard for anyone to understand. So yeah, maybe it just doesn't work to have an or. I do think the conversation around class 1 changes to create maybe a new bucket is a worthy conversation, but separate. And there is, as Len points out, a little bit of risk of like having this be contingent upon changes to class 1 and then, you know, sitting there and not accessible still.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to try to avoid that.
Got Eric.
As luck would have it, coming after John again, I was about to say the same thing, but I will just say that I go back to what you had said originally, Lynn, as a way to kind of keep this concept separate from the discussion on class 1 in the RPS. I think that intuitively makes sense that this be a proposal that's not contingent upon the success of one to have the other also work. So anyway, I think having these separate makes sense.
Go ahead, Duncan.
We haven't really gone over the class 1 wording that I put out there, but hopefully we will today. But I think in there, I put in the blue wordage here to indirectly make the new class 1 category to be just Connecticut projects. So that's yet to be determined. But if that is the case, we got this blue wording in the class 1 anyway, then that kind of cleans things up. Maybe that you brought up a minute ago, Mariana. We'll see about that. But so are we all thinking that we should do a class 1 or satisfy the red words for this?
I think it seems to me that we were pushing back on including the or language to avoid some of the other challenges that might come up with that.
So requiring class 1 for this then?
No, the opposite.
Oh,
Yeah,
just the red wording?
We haven't gotten quite to the red wording yet, but essentially up here in the very beginning where it says and Connecticut RPS criteria, the proposal I think would be to remove this.
Right.
And just have it addressed very specifically as a separate standalone qualification for a separate policy, if you will, that doesn't rely on class 1 eligibility.
Okay.
And that would very obviously put us into, excuse me, a situation where we would need to make sure that the guardrails that Laura had provided, the number one, that the language we added here actually captures what the concerns are of some of the environmental NGOs and whatnot, and also doesn't get too crazy either. So we just haven't gotten there yet. And for your edification, I do have on the agenda later on very specifically the RPS conversation, which is, as I said, kind of a separate policy consideration that warrants its own conversation.
Where are we right at the beginning on the type of project? It's just existing right now. Do we want to include unpowered or not? And does existing include recently decommissioned ones?
We might need to tailor very specifically what the definition of an existing resource is.
How about if we just get rid of that word existing and it just brings them all in? That's something that you've indicated, Mariana, maybe, that why limit it? Or is there a reason why we would want to limit it? Personally, I don't think there'd be many new ones coming in anyway, but let's talk about why we would not want to include the others. Sorry about the dogs, folks.
I actually can't hear the dogs. That it's interesting that you put it this way. When we talk about these potential lists, my automatic reaction is don't include them. But when we take out the word existing, that doesn't bother me so much, because that includes, yeah, you're right, existing hydro and other ones that will become hydro. But to me, that takes care of the issue of, are the ones on the list even feasible or not, or you know what I mean? Because if something is feasible for hydro and is moving forward for hydro and it becomes hydro, I don't have a problem with it falling under all the same class, you know, all the categories of the existing hydro.
That's helpful, Laura.
Makes sense? Is that, again, I feel like I might have a concussion, so I might not be saying so in a way that makes a lot of sense right now.
What I heard is you are okay with getting rid of the word existing?
Yeah, I didn't, at least I don't know if Alicia has a problem with it, but I didn't have an issue with taking out the word existing.
We have a bunch of hands up here. I want to make sure we keep in line here. I see Eric. Eric was first, and then John, and then Mariana.
So my comment had to do with the red underlined language. Maybe I should wait to for this current conversation to be played through, but so I'll just stand off to the side.
Sounds good, Eric. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just structurally, when I put this together, the language we're kind of focused on in this summary was really kind of an abstract. The intent was to provide a, you know, just a quick reference for essentially what this program was intending to accomplish. I think the real language we should focus on is in the sections that follow, like the eligibility and authority, like the red language that Eric was suggesting. And in that case, the idea of existing is a moot point, right? Because it would have to be a QF, so there's a size limitation and other kind of FERC criteria to satisfy that requirement. And it talks about its operational mode and interaction with natural resources, as we're going to kind of get into. So again, I would just say, like, let's not get hung up on the summary section. That's not intended to be, you know, real policy. It's just a guidepost for us, and it's probably already served its purpose.
Go ahead, Eric.
So my comment was just, you know, again, this was just the held over from before on the red. If you scroll down just a little bit into the eligibility and authority red language there, just wanting to make sure that in the last you know, 2 lines there's a reference to applicable site-specific standards for water quality and fish passage. That when we say water quality, we're also including flows.
Yeah.
That's usually, keep me honest here, Laura, maybe you know better than me, but I in working with a lot of the regulatory requirements and whatnot, that water quality does include flows as well.
You know, I didn't know, but I had the same question as Eric on that. I read environmental mitigation requirements above, and my mind said the flow stuff too, but I understand Eric's concern for calling that out because it might not be as clear to everyone else.
Right, it's just to make sure that right, we're not just talking about a chemical or bacteria type measurement. We're talking about adequate in-stream flows.
Well, especially because we're just about to have some pretty significant flow regulation changes. So yeah.
I think we can add that. I'm okay with that. I don't know, John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it feels like, you know, I'll just kind of put this out here again. We're sort of dancing around, you know, what are the specific guardrails? We're trying to catch everything. And I wonder if it's not worth revisiting the conversation around potentially requiring a LEHI certification, which captures all of what we're trying to do. I think if there's additional items, that's kind of a different discussion. But all the stuff that we're talking about is there's already a program that does that. So I'll just put that back on the table.
Go ahead, Duncan.
I think in the red, what we're trying to do is mimic what's already in the RPS, which seems to have gone through with everybody saying okay. But the first sentence here, the first 2.5 lines are new, and I don't really know if they're needed. What's wrong with just mimicking what we have in the RPS that has been there for a while, which is the second part of the red here, and go with that, and all is good.
So I actually wrote this section, or at least a piece of it anyway, and the rest of it I kind of pulled from the RPS. But the first few lines were intended to capture what we had discussed last week, which included resources that may not already be in compliance, but need to get there. There are a number of facilities that are out there that wouldn't qualify for any kind of a policy because they don't have the environmental mitigation applications in place. So what I was trying to do was capture that into, or those types of facilities into this policy so that they can come into compliance. And I think I used the word contract in here, which may not be the right term, but that was the general gist as to why I added it, was to give them the ability to potentially qualify and get right, essentially.
Right. So the wordage, state and federal environmental mitigation requirements is pretty much the same as down below, applicable state and federal requirements. Kind of the same, I guess, right? I mean, I guess that's okay.
Maybe redundant.
Yeah, another way to do it would be get rid of that first sentence and just add to the second sentence your words, or has submitted such plans to conform to the above. But all right, I understand why you put it in there.
I do have a question specifically for Laura and possibly Alicia if she's on. What I was trying to capture in this was literally the guardrails that you'd included in your document a few weeks ago. Does this capture, at least come close to capturing what you were trying to implement there, or is this missing the mark?
No, I don't think it's missing the mark. Obviously, the document was a lot longer than this and had multiple other comments, but I like this. I like this sentence, and I don't even mind the repetitiveness of the beginning and the second part. I think it's nice to have that. So.
Yeah, and this is what's already in, like you said, this is what's already in the class 1 RPS, and kind of solves our problem of the projects that don't based on the that are in the RPF or yeah, you know what I'm trying. End of the week, and all of my acronyms are just getting totally jumbled up. So you get what I'm trying to say.
So maybe it's not a concussion. Maybe it's just end of the week that I'm stumbling.
Yeah, that's it.
Go ahead, Mariana.
I have a question which I put in the document is, are there clear state and federal environmental mitigation requirements?
I think I can address to a degree. I'm trying to find your question here.
Don't worry. That was a question. Don't worry.
Okay.
It's fine. Don't worry about finding it.
For dams that have FERC licenses, generally speaking, yes, they do tend to differ. It's a site by site situation, and it's not always ideal in everybody's minds. So there may be additional requirements that people would want considered before qualification. But I was trying to capture essentially those that are under license, that have a license and are in compliance, that can get to this policy, can access this policy. And I was trying to find a way to capture those who aren't qualified and also don't necessarily deal with FERC regulation. I know that Laura had included in her document, a very specific section that talked about the, sometimes inadequacies of FERC environmental mitigation. So I was trying to find a way to include basically the state DEP having some kind of a say in the matter and that sort of thing too. It's difficult to capture in one paragraph because I think every facility is different.
Well, I will be copying, in the environmental stuff we're doing right now, we have some of that in there too. So it might not be needed to be captured everywhere.
Well, no, if this is specific language that's going to be submitted, it really does need to be captured
it needs to be, okay.
In the policy recommendations. the only thing I would say is reading the way this paragraph reads, and I don't mean to complicate things because I know how difficult this could be, but upon reading it, one can argue that the they can one can argue that the second part doesn't necessarily apply to the compliance of the first part. You know what I mean? So, well, maybe because it's okay, forget it. I take that back. I'm reading it as sections, and that's not as sections, it's a sentence. I take that back.
I think
Sorry.
you're right, Alicia, because the first one lets the project owner show that it's in the works, but then the second part says it's kind of got to be done. So no, you're right. And that brings me back to mine. Forget the first sentence, and in the second one, which everybody's already agreed to with the RPS, just add the wordage or has submitted such plans to be in compliance. It's just an idea.
That
And
makes
now,
sense to
now
me.
that we've discussed this long enough, I'm having reservations that I didn't have before, because I'm thinking of the case in Kinney Towns where they would submit a plan with no intention of doing anything. You know, they would submit something, but with never any intention of doing it. So, so there is a side of me that's kind of like just submitting a plan doesn't mean it's feasible or they plan on following that. And I know this doesn't relate to any of you that are on and that work in this industry, but I'm trying to think of the sleazeballs I've had to work with that we're trying to get around things, you know?
Is there
I think
a way for us to?
I think that if you put a semicolon after the first requirements, so mitigation requirements, semicolon, and move or has submitted plans to the end of the paragraph, it's more encompassing of all of the measures. Because I don't want to delete federal and state environmental mitigation requirements because first of all, I don't have in my mind what all of those could be. And if deleting it means that we are going to lose some definitions and protections, then we don't want to be there. But want to make sure that because, I understand the purpose of this is that if there is a project that could be eligible and have better environmental results with some sort of tariff, then you want to make sure that it is encompassing of fish passage and water quality. So
If I think moving it does seem like moving the or has submitted such plans to the end of the paragraph makes a lot of sense. And I think it's fine to keep the the first piece of it from my perspective. What I was thinking of with regard to what Laura just brought up, would it make sense for us to add an additional sentence after the piece about the plans being submitted that would require some kind of a implementation milestones to be determined by DEP or something along those lines to basically make sure that if you're only submitting a plan, like you're, for example, a bad player, and you're just going to submit plans into perpetuity and just bank the money, to ensure that that doesn't happen. I don't know if there's a way for us to tailor language that
I don't know. I was thinking of that myself. I was saying like submit plans with the intent of implementing. I don't know. I was just trying to, yeah. I mean, I don't know how you prove that intent. It's almost, yeah.
I did try to capture it when it's to be implemented upon receipt of a contract. And as I said, the contract word is probably not the right word, but I think there's a way to strengthen that. That basically puts it into a situation where there are implementation milestones required.
Yeah.
It's probably language we need to massage some more if that's a concept that we want.
I'm not going to push it hard. I do like the fact that you wrote, well, to be implemented upon receipt. I don't know if contract's the right word either, but But
Go ahead.
that's helpful. And again, you can't always write these things for the one scenario that you're thinking of that, someone would try to get around.
It never ends up being watertight. Go ahead,
Right,
John.
exactly.
Yeah, I appreciate. I think where we're going with this, with this wordsmithing makes a lot of sense. To the conversation around like how do you make sure things actually happen as promised. I think you can handle that. Maybe that's just one of the contract terms. Could be like a condition precedent. The tariff rate period doesn't kick in until the conditions precedent, whatever they might be for the specific project, are met, satisfied. And then I guess kind of tangential to that, I would ask Mariana if having that sort of contract sort of held in an escrow essentially would be beneficial to have like a broader partnerships with the Green Bank to help owners actually finance maybe some of the capital improvements that would be required to satisfy the conditions precedent, such as fish passage or water quality improvements through like a new gate or something along those lines.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think those are sort of the type of requirements that would be outlined in a contract, right? I don't know if it's a condition precedent or like a rep and warranty or basis for termination or default or that sort of thing. I know that if we were to be involved in any sort of financing, it would probably be in our financing agreement that one, they have to be under compliance with all of this, with a contract, and with probably things outlined here. And if they're not, then it's again an event of default.
Would you generally think that, I mean, I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire, and maybe you can't answer this, but if this policy were to be implemented, would it provide the Green Bank enough to be a financing partner? And what would we need to do, I guess? Maybe that's a better way to frame it.
I think it would. I think the sort of the difference between something like this from our perspective, or let's say a deep procurement, is this is floating, right? It doesn't have a set rate. So there's sort of protections as a financing party that you would add there in terms of debt service coverage requirements and that sort of thing to allow for that. But otherwise, yes, I think that's something that would be financeable from a Green Bank's perspective.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Duncan.
So to move along here, do you think we all agree that to put that wordage to be implemented or has submitted ... put that at the end so it takes it all in, and then we are going to either make some milestones here, or we're going to make this so that that project does not get this rate until those things are done, but they can sign the contract, but they don't get the rate until those things are done. So are we in agreement with that? And we'll hash that out and then be able to move on.
I would say so. I don't want to speak for everybody, but from my perspective, yes. Sounds like that is the case.
Yeah, I agree.
like it.
Okay. With that, I'll move down here to this next section in blue. I think we've already discussed potentially removing any kind of class 1 reference. So I've taken some notes so that we can kind of massage this language behind the scenes again ahead of next week's deadline for the policy committee. But with regard to the electric distribution, the interconnection, I know Eric had concerns with regard to Commerce Clause. We tried to find a way to tailor this in such a way that Connecticut ratepayers are going to help Connecticut resources. Does this interconnection right here with an electric distribution company, does it make sense to very specifically state an electric distribution company or the distribution grid in the state of Connecticut or something like that?
Probably.
Okay. Okay. And I was going to recommend that we add, to be very specific, electric distribution company or municipal utility, because there are 5 or 6 in the state of Connecticut that provide electricity as well. So those are 2 notes that I had taken. It with regard to the rest of this. How does it look in terms of other people's views? Go ahead, Duncan.
I put the 3 of them in there, but then I said, if you look at my notes on the right, that really we only need one of them. The first one is UI and Eversource. That's the definition of electric distribution company that I provided on the right. The add municipality takes care of that without having that word Connecticut in there. That is a big flag. Or we can just do the second one, which is in the in RES, right? Or the third one that's in the in RES. So we can do all 3, 2 of them, one of them. But I think any one of them takes care of our trying to just do Connecticut.
I think all 3 are applicable, and I think you can make a case that essentially any hydro located in Connecticut does have some positive impacts on the state's economic development, and in I think all cases or most cases they are consistent with the CES, but I don't think taking it out is necessary, but open others. I see John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I'm not really familiar with the CES, so I don't know if it specifically talks about hydropower or if there's a way to interpret it too. So that would be my only hesitation. The other 2, I agree, they're pretty straightforward.
The comprehensive energy strategy does include hydropower. And I would be in favor of leaving that there because the CES is fairly holistic, right? And it's the way that the state the way the state plans to get to its clean energy goals. And, I think that's something that we need to be basing decisions on going forward. And sometimes that will change and morph based on cost of or energy sources. And I think it allows for the decision-making process to keep up with DEP's own goals and the markets as they exist at that time.
Okay. Anybody else on this section? Okay.
Alicia, I want to make sure I'm understanding your comment. Are you suggesting that we remove that it is consistent with a comprehensive energy strategy?
I'm saying it. I think it's a good thing that.
Okay.
That's
Sorry.
going to keep us.
Got it. I completely misunderstood. Must be that
Markets and current needs. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, the CES, and forgive me that I have 10,000 different roadmaps and strategies in my head from all these other states as well. I think it does discuss hydropower to a degree. I don't think it's a very large section, but it does just discuss it to a degree. So go ahead, Duncan.
Thank you. So moving along, we've agreed to remove the black wordage above class 1. Correct me if I'm wrong, and we've agreed to include all 3 of the blues. But in the first one, we've agreed to add or municipality in the first blue, right?
An electric distribution company or a municipal utility.
Right. And we've agreed to remove the black wordage in class 1.
Yeah, I'm not doing these in real time right now, Duncan, but I am taking notes. So
yeah. No, that's fine. All right, good.
And moving down, I think this particular section, I think I had said something about the same deal as removing the class 1 reference and trying to capture the guardrails that we already discussed above. The next big question I think that was left out here with regard to the tariff is the timeline in terms of a recommendation for this consideration. I think the original proposal was 10 to 20 years. I think I had put in 15 to 20 because if I remember correctly, I think that's how the long-term contracts are generally defined in statute in Connecticut, although I may be mixing it up with Massachusetts, to be honest with you. I think Duncan, you had added 30, at least 30 years or no more than 30 years or something to that effect. Interested in thoughts on this. This is probably one of the more one of the bigger questions we have on this document. Go ahead, Duncan.
Can we actually look at my note on the right, or is it not easy to bring that up?
Let me see here. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. I say here, suggest no more than 30 years. This is more in line with inherent longevity of hydro, just the design. These things last a long time without major rebuilds. It's in line with FERC license terms that are granted nowadays. And it's also in line with when we went through all this back in the 80s, docket 850416, where there were standard front-loaded DPUC approved contracts for 30 years. So that's my argument for 30.
Go ahead, Eric.
So I don't really know anything about the answer that I'm looking for here, but I do know that there's a little bit more comfort within DEEP with the 10 to 20 year time frame. And if it were no more than 30, as Duncan had suggested, does that invite lots of different contracts of lots of different lengths? And I don't know what type of confusion is potentially becomes an issue there or not, but just noting that the 10 to 20 was of greater comfort as I bounced that with my colleagues.
Go ahead, Mariana.
I also tend to feel more comfort around the 10 to 20, specifically because this is not for new assets. So Duncan, when you reference sort of the longevity of hydro and FERC license, that makes sense for new assets. But if existing assets can participate, it gives me a little bit of pause for those reasons. And I think, yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Mariana. John?
I would just tend to lean more toward the longer contract terms. The infrastructure around a lot of these projects is large. It's always around water, and both those things really contribute to kind of high cost of investments. They can be complex. So you really need that time and that surety to be able to make good investment decisions. And that's why, I just think it's from an owner investor's perspective, a longer term contract is going to be more powerful to get some of the kind of outcomes that I think we're all looking for.
Duncan?
Right. If a project is facing relicensing and it's facing that came to the end of a previous contract, and it's looking to install a lot of expensive facilities, fisheries enhancing facilities, fish ladders, and so on, it wants to maybe go to the bank and say, hey, what can I borrow? And the bank is going to be happier with a longer term payment structure than a shorter one, and it can borrow more money if it's longer, and it can put in better and bigger facilities with a bigger loan, the loan that it needs to do what it needs to do. So all I can say is the longer term, better for having these projects do what they need to do, and to let these projects get the loans that they need to put in the facilities that they need to put in with relicensing, which is a lot of these projects are going through right now.
Yeah, I will add, so I get questions a lot because we're relicensing some of our facilities in Massachusetts. I do get questions a lot why we're looking for a 50-year term, which seems to be ridiculous. I mean, I'll probably be dead in 50 years. And it's a very long time. And to Duncan's point, the big reason is because of the capital investments that are required to get a quote unquote get right with the environmental mitigation. Tens of millions of dollars worth of investments does require, at least in our case, does require a longer runway, so to speak, to be able to finance those resources and not essentially go too deeply in the red for a long period of time. So personally, I think there's definitely an argument to be made on both sides, with regard to a shorter term, being able to revisit that every 10, 20 years, whatever it is. But I also see the value in what Duncan and John have mentioned as well, because these are projects that need to be financed. It's also something we can leave kind of open and say longer term contracts are in the industry's perspective more beneficial to be able to finance large scale capital projects. Shorter term obviously is more in line with, I think, what generally the state has been comfortable with over the last few years. Let the legislature decide how they want to approach that. That's just a thought. Go ahead, Duncan.
We all agree on 20 years right now? Anybody not comfortable with 20?
I'm having trouble weighing in on this at all. Obviously, if we were talking about relicensing windows, I don't like long relicensing windows because it doesn't give an opportunity to reassess a project, but that's not what this is about. This is about financial security. And I do agree that there are a lot of expensive improvements that are needed, and it would be hard to finance those without a longer period. So I'm having trouble figuring out if there would be any kind of negative environmental side to that. This almost seems much more a financial question. Alicia, do you have an opinion on that? If this has because I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing this as a financial decision, not really an environmental one.
Well, it is a financial decision. And understanding the finances and economics to the extent that I can, because I'm not working in industry, understanding that it also, I think the discomfort comes from you're saying you're going to prop up this technology for a long period of time, 20 to 30 years, and provide that incentive for that long when we may have much better options we should be incentivizing in the future that make more financial sense to ratepayers and do not have the impact. That's the concern I have, but that's why we're all here working together, is to talk about this and find that balance.
So that gets back to your comment on it. You got to still have flexibility for the ratepayers to figure out what's best for them at that time, while at the same time you need financial security for the folks who are going to be investing in the repairs and environmental improvements of their dam facilities. I guess my big question is, do we have to put a date here? Do we have to put years here?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
We may just offer up the general range that we've discussed and say, it needs to be discussed in more detail. But I don't want to cut off the conversation. I see Mariana and look like Eric. Eric just took his hand down, but Mariana has her hand up.
Yeah, I hear what Len, Duncan, and John are saying, and that makes a lot of sense if there are improvements. And I think it's hard to, with this, understand if there won't be improvements that will be required. And so I guess that's a little bit of where I'm coming from. But I agree with you all that if there are capital needs and improvements, or if those capital needs or improvements will be better for efficiency, environmental mitigation, compliance, etc., then having a longer term makes sense. The other thing that we could, and sort of not leaving any years on there, is an option. It also begs the question of, like, okay, if it ends up being for 5 years, we're not helping anybody here, right? It's just sort of a toss up. So maybe something that could support is saying of no less than 15 to 20 years. And therefore, at least you have a floor for a long-term contract while allowing for something longer if necessary.
Better.
Yeah, I was getting more and more comfortable with the language that Duncan had suggested of no more than 30 years and not necessarily having a floor, just given that there are all those different scenarios that Mariana just articulated. I mean, the question I often get is, with a tariff, what are we buying? Right. And if it seems to be a difference between a reward to a facility that may already doing all the right things on one extreme, and on the other side, it's an incentive to a facility that's not yet doing those things but needs a boost. So I'm still wrestling with, what the length of contract might be needed for each of those two extremes. And since both would obviously be covered under this proposal. So I guess it may be the middle ground here is, no less than 10 years, no more than 30, or, something in that range. I think we'd probably be comfortable with. But I agree that when we get to issues like this going forward, it's a perfect point to just say, okay, let's put a pin in this. We'll have some commentary around this. This we won't, it won't be like so do we all agree on 20 years? And by the way, Duncan, I really appreciate the way you do that as a broker to get to a decision. I don't know that we I know that in my instance, I can't necessarily say like, yes, I'm comfortable with 20 years, but also it's okay if some of these, get worked out by the legislative process if that's where it goes.
Thanks, Eric. John?
Yeah, I think, I'll just reinforce the value of having a longer term contract. Flexibility within that is, I think reasonable to a point. As Mariana said, if it's too short of a term, really doesn't deliver the value that I think we want. In terms of the types of investments people are going to be making or be looking at, with very few exceptions, most of the state's hydropower fleet is, probably 40 years old, if not older. So you'll be looking primarily, from a generation side, it's going to be, life extension, major overhauls, things of that nature that just going to keep the units operating at high efficiency and reliability. And then the other stuff that we were talking about, which is really important as well, which adds value in a non-power way, are the environmental enhancements. And we'll try to talk about, the value of those benefits to some degree, but it's not a market-based value generally. And then to Alicia's point about not wanting to kind of maybe be tied into a technology that has the potential to be replaced by something better down the road. I think one way to think about that is that the rates that this particular program would be delivering are based on the rates that energy cost, right? So if something better comes along, the rates that this program will deliver will naturally be lowered by market forces. But you still get, until that day happens, and I, as an environmentalist, would love to be put out of business by cold fusion. That would be awesome, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So until that day happens, we got to make the most of what we have. And if we can make it better by putting programs like this in, I think we should do that.
Go ahead, Duncan.
These projects are not going to just come in and get a rate automatically and run with it. They have to show their value and their confirmation with environmental requirements and everything. So our red wordage and our blue wordage gives a lot of opportunity here, I think, for the PURA to determine at that point, well, we think that this project should get this term, and we think this project could get this term because they have to install this, and so on. So I like, Eric, what you said, no more than 30. And we put in just no more than 30 and let them go from there with it.
So I think we have a proposal on the table, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if everybody's comfortable with that or if it's something that we're going to have to continue the discussion into next week on. Um, obviously, this is final, but
Len, may I just suggest that I think for now, we leave it at that, no more than 30, and understand that folks, at least I speak for myself, we need to review this sort of internally at some point and may come back with edits, but there seems to be consensus on that. And so as someone who had proposed something else, I'm good with that, with a caveat that we may come back with other feedback or suggestions.
okay. I'm trying to think what else is in the in terms of questions and big issues here. Um, forgive me, I can't remember all of the different pieces of this off the top of my head, but I think
I think the only one outstanding then might be the knee pool
thank you, yes, and that's
question. And John, you might know this better than I do, but it's my understanding that in order to get a knee pool certificate, you need to be able to trade Rex class 1, 2, or 3. And so therefore, if we're not requiring from an eligibility perspective to be able to trade Rex, we might want to sort of delete other requirements associated with complying with NEPL.
I think that's right. If we're gonna be removing the RPS criteria and that keeping that separate, then I don't think we need to be concerned with the complications of the GIS or NEPL account.
okay.
Simple, wherever we can simplify it, I'm a yes.
Anybody have any objections to that? Okay. Well, with that, that's the review of the entirety of this policy. We have as I said, I took a bunch of notes to make some changes and whatnot. Before we move on to the next one on the agenda, does anybody have anything else they want to add to this? If not, then I'm going to propose that the policy subcommittee take this, make our changes over the course of the coming few days, and then ideally, we can move forward with bringing this back to our respective camps that need to review it and go from there.
And Len, just a suggestion on that, as you do, when we bring it back to our camps, could you just add a little section for, comments? Because that'll be where, we collect those, pros and cons that'll be, going into that final report.
Sure thing. And I will say, just to reiterate, I know we've said this before, these are just considerations that we're offering. This is in no way us making a determination. This is what policy is going to come out of 2024 legislative session. So all of this has to be reviewed by the legislature anyway. All right, I'm going to try to go to another. I'm sorry here. Which one am I on? Oop, my bad. Just bear with me for a second. I'm trying to figure out which screen I'm on here.
So you're looking for either solicitation or the class 1 document.
You've got them there on the top as different tabs.
My apologies. Give me a second here. It's tough for me to see this here. Okay, here we go. The solicitation. Okay. So let this pull up here and I'll reshare my screen again in a second. Okay. That come up?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Um, so I think, Mariana, you actually took the lead on this one. Do you mind, kind of running through the review pieces of it?
Yes. So I'll try to point out sort of some of the changes that we made, and please, folks, if there's commentary around that, just interrupt me or raise your hand. So one of the big things that we discussed was this, like four rows down, was the idea of shall instead of may, which Steve's already was the one who pointed that out, which I think was a good comment. So that was added. And then language was added as well, so that this is interconnected to the electric distribution system located in Connecticut, again, to make clear that this is for Connecticut assets. Other changes include down in number 3, any investments made or expected to be made by the facility to improve emissions profile, water quality, or fish passage of such facility, and that intends to capture some of what we discussed, whether they're in compliance or expect to be in compliance. The language around the positive reuse of sites with limited development that talks about brownfields or landfills was removed. And then also added in section 10 that the proposal meets at the time of submission or within a reasonable time frame as a condition for selection, the applicable to state and federal requirements, including dam safety and site-specific standards for water quality. So let me stop there. Any reactions to those changes?
I was in favor of them.
Any objections? Okay.
Why was it changed to a pilot?
That was changed. Apologies. Thank you for mentioning that. That was changed previously. I think I hadn't reviewed it. The reason that was changed, and I introduced that change, is suggestions internally, so that if it's a pilot solicitation, there's grounds for potentially having another solicitation later on if things were to work well. So to do it as a pilot for the option of being able to have another solicitation at a later time. Duncan?
You just include the wordage that you changed, giving the date of December 31st, 2025? Or are you not there yet?
Not there yet, but that's the other big one. So unless anyone has anything else before that sentence, which is in, I don't know, gray, which I think is where the majority of the discussion will be. Let's jump into it. So this sentence talks about both how much will be procured, and I know there's been discussion about putting a cap, putting a minimum.
One thing that I noticed with this, Mariana, the way we word it, I think we need to make sure that the minimum, if you will, whatever it happens to be, it's clear that it's not specifying that a resource that is below the minimum is actually not qualified. So, a 3.5 megawatt facility, for example, would be able to qualify as part of that minimum, I think so we need to kind of tailor the language, I think, a little better.
Yeah, we can say an aggregate or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree with that. So let's start with comments here in terms of size or date, actually, go ahead. John? I don't, wait, actually, Duncan, you might have been first. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah, I don't care. Can we look at my note on the right? Is that possible? And then I just lay it out on the date question.
Is it this one, Duncan, or is it this one here? Here we go.
Okay, hold it. Yeah, I recommended 20 megawatts. Well, you got 20 megawatts, so I guess I'm all set. Maybe you had a lower number there. Yeah, it was 5. All right, so I recommend 20 megawatt. So we're good. All right, sorry to bother you.
All good. John, did you want to jump in on something?
Yeah, if I can. So it wasn't clear to me, maybe I just missed this, is how many solicitations there would be? Is this sort of a one-time thing, or is this, would this solicitation happen every couple of years? And then the other thing I would just point out is that I understand the point of the idea of capping the capacity of contracts awarded, but if one of the criteria is the kind of the essentially it's going to be a competitive pricing solicitation, the larger projects in general will be able to enjoy economies of scale and deliver or propose lower rates, which may not really be fully in line with getting the full suite of power and non-power benefits that a particular project might be able to provide. So I'm not sure there's a way around that necessarily, unless we think about the language being more flexible and not being based solely on a bid price. And I guess also just related to that, I'm wondering if we're contemplating a ceiling price for bids, just how will we manage competition in a solicitation process among and between the various projects that might want to participate.
So I'll try to address some of that, John. Your first question of how many solicitations, for now, the way it's drafted is only one. And I guess the language of adding as a pilot would be so that there is sort of some precedent for potential future solicitations. Your second question in terms of price, I think the fact that sort of these items that are listed from like 1 to 10, and so numbering might change right afterwards. So it is not just based on the delivered price of such resources, but other factors that I think would have to be factored in terms of identifying who would be the recipient of such solicitation. And I think at that point, it would be up to DEEP, and I know they have a ton of experience, and Eric can speak to it in terms of solicitations and putting systems in place so that you're sort of rating or giving weights to different things and not just price.
Yeah, I think Mariana's right, and I think there's also a very strong preference for it being a bid system versus a set price. I think that the market and how it works and how it helps also on behalf of ratepayers keep things within reason is it has been useful to DEEP in the past.
In
So
terms
let
of,
me just,
go ahead.
sorry, Mike.
No, go ahead.
Let me just put a hypothetical out there. you have a project that's, let's say it's 3 megawatts. And it has a requirement to install up and downstream fish passage and protection. And the cost to do that is, I don't know, $7 million. And that generates no additional revenue for the project. It's a cost. And oftentimes it comes with actually reduced generation because now you're diverting more flow away from the turbines. So there's kind of like a double whammy for the owner. But to install that fish passage, you're providing a lot of benefit to the state, to ratepayers, right? In terms of the environmental enhancements. And you're also potentially avoiding, if that owner is able to make those investments and keep the project operating and maintain it up to, not only environmental standards, but the public and dam safety standards, that the burden and the responsibility to bear those costs and to be responsible for those items stays in the private sector, right? And doesn't get transferred in some way, whether direct or indirect, to the ratepayers. So there's this fairly complicated kind of avoided cost, analysis that you need to think about relative to, how a smaller project bid may be higher than, maybe 1 10 or 20 megawatt project that comes in and maybe doesn't have all those requirements, but the benefits aren't equal. So I think that's a really complicated analysis. I just want to caution us about, you're just going into that with our eyes open and making sure that we just do the best we can to consider those complexities.
Yeah, it's a point well taken, John. And I don't think that it's easy at all to think about all the different variables, but I know those would be taken into consideration as part of the solicitation. It's not just the price. It's all those other criteria.
Yeah. And I'm not, just so just for the record, I'm not trying to shoot holes in this. I like this idea. I think it has, a lot of potential. I'd like to see something like this happen. I just want to, if we're going to make, this a consideration, maybe we could be a little more clear in the criteria that will be used to evaluate any bids or proposals.
I was going to say, do we need to be more specific as to what value is being retained by a procurement here? And that's, to your point, John. I can see that being necessary. We've seen a few solicitations in other states with other technologies that have kind of only looked at price and not looked at other advantages and values that would be retained by the various states that are doing that. And it's a missed opportunity. And in this case, I think the point of this thing is to really make sure that we can keep alive and improve the existing resources we have. So I'm okay with including more parameters on this and also specifying what the values are that we're trying to capture.
I think I was just going to say, I think it would be useful. I'd love to see what's proposed there. So I appreciate that. Go ahead, Mariana.
No, I'm aligned. I would, Len, I don't know if you can scroll up
Sorry.
a little bit.
Sure.
To the beginning. Because the way it reads it now is, in making any selections of proposal, the commissioner shall consider factors including but not limited to, and that's where we name all of those. But John, if you believe that there could be stronger language so that it's clear that it's not just number one there, which is the delivered price of such resources, but the others that makes sense, and feel, if you could just propose some language, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take a swing through that and let me just get a thought. Should I make changes in this SharePoint? Is that the best format?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please do so.
We'll do that. sure there's a track change. There's, okay.
Yep.
In terms of just looking at this and thinking back to our previous discussion on the previous consideration, it does mention water quality or fish passage. Should we very specifically add improved flows as well, or
I think so. That can't hurt to be a little redundant.
yeah.
It isn't included in the first, it seems like that should be after run of river hydropower in the previous as well.
Yeah, I think we had said we were going to do that. I didn't do any
Okay.
track changes yet, but it's in my notes to do after the meeting.
Can I just
Sorry.
make just another like nuance with hydropower and fish passage in particular. Sometimes there's the idea of instantaneous run of river. I think it sounds great, but it doesn't always necessarily lend itself to optimizing the environmental performance of a project. There could be a number of different areas where that comes into play, but just using fish passage as an example, a project may release flows very strategically as attraction flows for fish passage facilities that may not qualify under the instantaneous run of river definition. So I think sometimes you just have to be careful with how we're wording this, that we're not excluding project operations that may not meet a criteria in a strict definition, but do provide a net environmental benefit.
I would let others that have more experience on.
Well, I think
That's that.
Laura's probably got,
Yeah.
Yeah,
way in here.
yeah,
I don't
so I agree. If we look at all the various things, there's things where we want turbines turned on during certain times and turned off during other times to allow the eel don't get chopped up at night and this kind of thing. There's all sorts of things going on there. The thing is, though, I think the majority of time, what we're talking about here is that a peaking type facility that is not doing any of the peaking associated with for any kind of environmental reasons can have significant impact on the environment. And for example, even these ones that are called run of the river that aren't run of the river, similar, we'll use Rainbow as an example here, that are really peaking on a day, a 24-hour basis, it really can deter fish passage. It really can be a problem that the fish are not coming to the facility and using the facility because of this kind of even 24-hour peaking. So my thing is, it's like I'm trying to think percentage wise. I think the bigger percentage wise is going to be that when we talk about instantaneous run of the river situation, we're generally talking about a more beneficial thing. And you're right, there is going to be an exception for operation and flows relating to improving environmental conditions too. But I don't have the data in front of me to know the percentages. And I know in general, when we're looking at overall river health and ecology, whatever the river flows at normally, the kind of highs and lows of the river are what is the most beneficial for the environment. There are little tweaks, so.
And I think the problem is we don't have a good word or phrase to put into some sort of criteria, right? It's Leahy uses ecological flow regimes that support healthy habitats, but it's difficult when you try to put this into any sort of regulatory scheme because that even is still not well defined. So that's the problematic part of this. We don't have a good word for it.
Yeah, and we're not the first ones to struggle with this, right? I mean, it's so site specific, even within a particular, beyond a river system, it's like that particular reach of the system is going to have its own characteristics that,
I mean, you could
Yeah,
say
I think
instantaneous, run of the river flows, except in the cases where modification of the flow would specifically benefit, whatever, fish passage or
Yeah.
ecological health, but.
I like some sort of acknowledgement that it could be, right? Not saying it has to be or that's
No, I
rule.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you're making a good point there. There are the scenarios, and I can think of the scenarios, but I don't want to diminish the fact that instantaneous run of the river is kind of the goal. And yes, exceptions can be made for where manipulation of the flow enhances something ecologically.
I think
But-
we're in violent agreement, Laura. I absolutely agree.
Just hard to find the right wording. I mean, but we could put a little clause, except in such cases where modification of the flow has a direct ecological benefit. I don't know.
That'd be good from my perspective. I don't know.
Okay. Because you're all right. There are scenarios like that.
Duncan, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Right, this is all okay, but maybe we're getting into too much detail here. I think that just leaving it instantaneous is fine, John. I don't think you need to worry about somebody coming over your project and saying, hey, you're not doing instantaneous run of river, because you're just doing what you are needing to do to be in compliance. I think we're all in good hands here, all of us, and agreeing that, instantaneous run of river, except if the project is just complying with the operation of its fish facilities, then it's going to be a little bit different. And I don't think we need to get into detail of changing the definition of instantaneous run of river, because then we'd have to go back to the RPS and do changes there as well and so on. So I'm okay with just leaving it instantaneous run of river. And I think that the projects will be fine doing what they need to do to comply with the operation of their fish ladders and adjusting the flow accordingly.
I know there are other sections here we need to cover. I think besides, I think we might have gotten a little sidetracked on a few things, but the size limitations or minimums in addition to the date, which I know in here is described as December 31st, 2025. Duncan had proposed 2024. I don't see 2024 as being a viable date to get a procurement through. I mean, this realistically, if the legislature is able to move forward on a proposal, you're talking May. Even if it goes into effect in July or June, that's a really compact period of time for Deep to get mobilized and everybody else to do what they have to do.
Could we say, no later than 12 months after, adoption of the program, that instead of saying a date certain, to give a period of performance that's based on when this thing actually went live, if it ever did?
I'll have to talk with my colleagues about that in terms of the time frame. I kind of like the way that it's put forward right now, promptly, but no later than. Obviously the goal would be to do it as soon as possible, but I don't know if there are some advantages for also giving a little bit more time for operators to have to put together proposals and things like that. But you're right. That date is not for when we would be receiving proposals. That's when the solicitation would be going out. So I kind of like the language the way it is, I guess, is what I'm suggesting, but can certainly look at that with my colleagues.
I will just add on here that language, sort of a date, is not something that I saw in some of the other language that requires solicitations. it was new and it was introduced so that there would be a line inside of when Deep would have to issue this. Just saying that so that it's new. It's creating sort of some deadline for Deep. And I sort of can understand both and can support both sort of 12 months after adoption or putting a date on there, like end of December of 2025, along with the language that says sort of probably, but in any case, no later than, so that it's clear that it's a deadline.
Well, I just like, Eric, I'm hearing that you and presumably Deep are comfortable with this. And since you guys are the ones that are sort of signing up to administer this, I would defer to, what works for you guys. You know your organization better than we do.
I would say, and this is certainly no knock on anybody, but I would say it does make sense to me to have some kind of a deadline, whether it's 12 months or if we don't, I have seen things get put into law that just kind of get sat on for long, long periods of time. Other than that, I won't speak to the timeline other than to say I don't think the end of this year is reasonable. So.
And then in terms of size, are we in agreement of what we want to include on there?
I know that the preference at Deep is to have it just be an up to number and not necessarily have a floor. But because there is such a relatively low floor to the upper limit, that seems like it would be okay. But of course, I'd have to check with folks at Deep. But what do you think, John?
I guess one thing that I think when you read that sentence about up to at least 5 megawatts and up to 20 megawatts, it could be interpreted as projects have to be at least 5 megawatts in capacity. I don't think that's the intent.
That was what I tried to address in the beginning, John. Same deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely not the intent.
Yeah.
And so I think we can add language about in aggregate.
Right.
Say in aggregate. I think that might.
I wonder if it's the capacity is less of the measuring stick than whatever Pura tells us, like the cost of ratepayers and acceptable cost of ratepayers maybe the program has X dollars in funding, and you select the best proposals from that.
The procurements that I'm aware of have been megawatt focused more than the budget focused, but I could certainly ask about that.
But that's probably based on some assumptions on how many megawatt hours a megawatt installed will produce for any particular technology, right? I did, while we were kind of talking before, I just went and looked at that CES, which I'd never really seen before, but it talked about how much money was available for like LREC and ZREC programs, how much had been allocated, what was left. And I'm just assuming, and this could be incorrect, is that that's the way the state wants to kind of think about programs like this. So instead of, ultimately, someone's going to tie this back to dollars, right? But I think the real thing is let's just make sure it's clear that you don't have to be at least 5 megawatts. It's just about procuring, capacity.
Duncan has an hand up.
Take care of that in the pretty violet wordage there. Say the commissioner shall select proposals from such resources for a total of at least 5 megawatts and up to 20. Does that take care of it? For a total of?
Yeah, I think you can either do that or say in aggregate.
Oh yeah, in aggregate. Okay.
Either of. I know we're running here on time. Do we want to try to finalize the last comment? that there was on the document. Something I think it was from you.
Can I just ask a question about, sorry, where it says any such long-term agreement shall be subject to review? It's below the pretty violet. Why is long-term there? Is it defined somewhere? And is that going to confuse people as to what needs to go to PURA for review? Because it will create confusion.
I think the reason it was added is because in a previous discussion, we talked about the solicitation being for a long-term agreement. And so the only section that it's referenced for is there. I guess if you think that's going to create confusion, we can add other language about the procurement being for sort of a long-term agreement.
Yeah, because if it's not defined somewhere else, a lot of people are going to be scratching their heads as to what should be subject to approval by PURA or not.
Yeah, I see your point.
In terms of the last comment here, I think it came from Duncan and then Mariana, you responded. Do you want to jump into that quickly before we run out of time?
Sure, Duncan. So you had mentioned that as written, the class 1 RECs would get transferred to the electric distribution system. As written, it says that either they can be sold or retained, so by the owner, sold through NEPL or retained by electric distribution company. So I think it allows for both structures.
Go ahead, John.
John?
Yeah, I guess this comes back to the definition. This could be interpreted as projects that are already class 1 resources or are the eligible projects, which may not be our intention here, considering the discussions we've had today.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of like what is included in the proposal is important. And it may be in the distribution utility's interest to want to have a bundled contract that includes energy, RECs, and potentially capacity. And maybe that should just be at the option of the bidder to specify what products are included in their proposal. Or remove, or just keep it to the energy, to keep it simple. Everything qualifies, and continue to kind of compartmentalize the discussion around what the RPS does for hydro.
So I think you have 2 points on there. One is about if this is just for class 1s. I think that could be addressed if you add something about certificates issued by NEPL for any class 1 system procured under this section, if applicable. Your second question, I think, goes more into the nitty-gritty of if the bid includes or doesn't include RECs. And that's sort of where my mind goes. Like, I think that goes into like the deep solicitation. I don't know if we have to include it here, but open to comments.
Yeah, there's also we haven't talked about this a lot, but capacity as another commodity. And in some instances, in some of our projects we own in Vermont, we have agreements with the interconnecting utility, and they're taking all products. They view the capacity, are able to kind of look at that as a load reducer. So instead of going out and having to procure capacity in the forward capacity market, they can reduce their capacity obligations through this contractual relationship. And there's tremendous value there for all parties. So that's another area where there could be kind of value to ratepayers and utility to the utilities. So again, it's just like, as long as we allow flexibility in specifying the products, I think it's probably some simple language we can include.
Yeah,
Mhm.
please propose some language. I think that makes sense, John.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be great.
Duncan has his hand up too.
Right, so the way it's written now, the project can either sell the RECs and get revenue, or the RECs go to the distribution company, right? So then the proposal, the price that this project is bidding would have to reflect that. So is that the way we plan on keeping it? It'll kind of be up to the project on whether they want to keep or sell their RECs. And what they're proposing, it's in their proposal. They're either going to say, we're going to keep them and sell them ourselves and get that revenue, or the distribution company can take them and use them. Is that how we're doing it? That's kind of what you said in your comment on the right, Mariana, right? Can either be
That's
sold or retained.
as currently drafted. My understanding is that that's what it's implying. That it can be either way. I don't know if it's up to the choice to the bidder or at as part of the solicitation, but it allows for both. And I think that's where it's sort of challenging in terms of how much we include in the legislation versus what are going to be sort of terms that need to be worked out by DEEP as part of the solicitation.
I think that's the gist of the questions and the review and whatnot. Does anybody else have any big picture issues or questions or comments on this proposal? I think we have a bunch of different edits and whatnot that we're going to integrate over the course of the next few days. Same deal with the previous one. I just moved that we send this over to the policy subcommittee to make some tweaks, and then hopefully by next week we can again send this off into the respective camps to be reviewed. With that, we have about 10 minutes left. I think I'm just going to stop sharing this very quickly here. So we did have one additional consideration that we had to take into account this week. I don't know if we're going to have time to actually go through it or not. I don't know if people have hard stops, then we probably should skip over it and table it till next week, and go on to just a couple of very quick updates from the environmental and industry subcommittees. Open to proposals here, but that would be my approach, barring objection.
I think the updates would be great. I don't know, Alicia, if you want to do the environmental, or Laura.
Laura, do you?
Do we want to, what do you mean? I thought we were going to hold off sharing it for.
No, we're
No,
just
I think
giving
you're just giving an update.
status update.
Okay. Well, I gave a little bit of an update right as we started the call, that we're about 90% done with it. And that we expect to have it, I think Tuesday we were talking, or Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah, early in the week. I would say 97.5%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So she's got a higher number based on absolutely no data, but that's all right.
Okay. So the reason why I had these on here was so that we can kind of come to an understanding or a plan next week to review the various sections that were assigned to the two different subcommittees, and then ideally put those in action into a final format that we can integrate the policy considerations as they come back from our respective camps, and actually have a full draft, if you will.
And how did you want to do that, so that we can have a discussion as a group? Did you want us to, obviously we're happy to share it with a group, but if there's a way to, accept comments for review, I'll let you decide, but. we'll,
I was gonna actually ask Mariana if we could continue leveraging the SharePoint that she had set up and just do it that way. That way there's track changes. We can actually all review it at the same time and not make a big mess. So,
Definitely, there are other folders that can be added on there, and you all should have the functionality to do so, so that we can continue to use it. And if anybody doesn't have access yet that needs to have access, we can grant them access.
thank you,
so I can
Mariana.
probably just upload it right to a new folder, Mariana.
Yeah.
Duncan, go ahead.
Right, with the policy committee, we just had one document that we didn't get to today, and that's the class 1 added section.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple and pretty straightforward, so maybe I'll talk with a policy subcommittee and maybe we can just send it out to everybody to see what they have to say. Any comments on that? Is that okay?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I
Yep.
feel like we've talked about that one a few times, so we think
Yeah.
we should be ready for that.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, includes the guardrail language and so on. So the other one, the industry subcommittee, we have the benefits section, we have the existing environment section, and we have the challenges section, all of which we have worked on. And maybe we can, when we feel comfortable, we can send those out to the mass and see if there's any comments on that, just to keep things moving before the next meeting.
Yeah,
That sound okay?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and leveraging the SharePoint again so that everybody can kind of take a look at the documents ahead of time. And ideally maybe next week we have a pretty good handle on the bulk of the report, or at least the draft of a report here. And Eric and Quat can take it to their groups and review it and whatnot, and ideally move forward and hit our deadlines. So other than that, does anybody have any other public comment?
I just have something just to make sure you're all aware, because it's kind of weird how this went out. But DEP just issued a draft report and are looking for comments on it. It's on select Connecticut energy supply issues, but it's something that you all should take a look at and possibly comment on. And unfortunately, and I don't know, maybe you've seen an actual public notice, but I couldn't find anything shareable other than the document itself. So I don't know, Eric, if you know, if there's like an actual public notice that went out, but I could not find one.
I'm looking at our public notices page right now. I'll share the link to that if I find it.
Okay. But I just wanted to make everyone aware, because they do acknowledge within this draft report that there are the benefits for any small in-state hydropower aren't realized within the RPS, but that they do acknowledge that, they have the power to and can utilize procurements to benefit in-state hydropower. So there isn't a more of a preference for out of state as there is now. So anyway, just want to let you know it was out there.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Lisa.
Alicia. Duncan, go ahead.
Right, another thing that's out there are 3 bills, I think, that are being considered, not concerning revisions to the NRES and shared clean energy programs, not concerning modifications to the RPS, or not concerning solicitation of Running River Hydro. So that almost covers kind of what we're doing. It doesn't talk about the tariff one that we're working on, but I'm going to try to follow those a little bit and see if there's any opportunity to testify or what have you on those. But those, I guess, are what we call placeholders, right?
I'm not 100% sure what the intention is, but they could be. I'm not sure.
They are placeholders.
Do we know, Abigail, when public or hearings might be coming up for providing testimony on those?
So we have a public hearing on the 27th, and the agenda is posted for that. We also have a public hearing scheduled for the 7th, but we don't have an agenda for that one yet. Just to put on your calendars.
The 27th, if I'm not mistaken, that's mostly solar bills, I think, right?
Yes.
Right, for these three bills that I just listed, we don't know any plans for having them at a public hearing or testimony right now.
Yeah, but the agenda should be posted about like 5 days before the
Yeah,
7th.
okay, thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Well, the next date and time of the meeting, I think next Friday at 1 p.m. I think that is the 1st, right? Or is that the 29th? I'm sorry. Is it a leap year this
All right,
year?
that's the first.
It is the 1st. Thank you. I couldn't remember. So it would be the 1st at 1 p.m. And with that, I would move to adjourn. With
Second.
2 minutes to spare. Everybody, thank you very much this week.
Thanks.